All right, we're going to do a short segment on apologetics for the balance of the program because I have had many emails stating that the famous rock singer, musician Prince was a Christian. Well, he was known to be a Jehovah's Witness, which is a known cult, and I have two cult experts in studio with me, and I'm going to get to them in just a moment, and they are often my co-hosts as well, and that would be Eric Barger and Joel Martin Rishi. And Eric spent years in the world of rock music before becoming a Christian. He also wrote a very provocative e-newsletter about the rock musician Prince here within the last few weeks. As I said, I've had emails stating that this man was a Christian, and is this just wishful thinking? Can Jehovah's Witnesses be truly a Christian in the Orthodox manner that many of you listeners would believe? So we're going to just look at some of the basics of that cult, but let me just first read one or two paragraphs that Eric writes about, and he says this: the main point to me is that the world pronounces something as Christian, but they have no idea what they're really saying. They lump us all together, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and others, and it's confusing not only for the unsaved, but it's really confusing when people from evangelical-styled churches start repeating the same nonsense. Joel Martin Rishi and Eric Barger, welcome back into the programming here. We appreciate your being in studio.
Thanks, Jen.
Eric, explain what you meant by that. I understand, but what do you mean by the fact that the world pronounces something as Christian? They have no idea what they're really saying.
The whole mystique thing that's happening now after Prince's death, I think we need to identify to listeners who don't know much about him, if anything, that this is going to be this generation's Elvis. Mm-hmm. And his home in Minnesota is going to be like Graceland has become. It's already happening. And I say that knowing there's a lot of other rock stars that could have died, but he was something to this generation, this one right behind me, my daughter's generation, for example. And so often we hear people make these statements. I think really what we're watching when we hear people in the church make these statements about others who have passed on and how they're in a better place. Well, if they didn't know Jesus Christ, they're certainly not in a better place. They'd rather be here in a slave camp someplace than where they have ended up for all eternity. And we do such a disservice to people. But this is, the dirty little secret here is, this is what happens when entire generations are not taught about false religions by the church, by the pastors, by the Sunday school teachers, by anybody who understands what they're talking about and has the research. When we don't speak up on these things and the church doesn't know, they get a fuzzy interpretation of people who the media may call Christian. I have headlines right now open on my computer, headline after headline, where they called Prince a Christian. Now, the world loves to do that to lump us all together and then say, well, look at Christian, look at his filthy lyrics, look at his lifestyle. You know, they love to do that. But the thing is that what we're seeing here is what happens when teachers like Dr. Martin, Jill's dad, and myself and Jill and others, we talk about these things, and the basic evangelical church out there thinks it's too negative and doesn't want to hear it.
Joel Martin Rishi, and I do consider you a cult expert, cult and occult expert. What are the primary differences between fundamental Christianity and the belief system known as Jehovah's Witnesses?
Well, Jehovah's Witnesses do not believe in a Trinity. This is a key thing. They do not believe that Jesus rose bodily from the dead. They believe he rose as a spirit creature. So right there you have a strike at the heart of Christianity. And, there are multiple things that they do believe that we do not believe. But if you're going to deal with the Jehovah's Witness, my father always said, focus on Jesus. And that is the key thing. When you are sitting down with Jehovah's Witnesses, you can say, well, let's talk about Jesus. Define your terms. You need to figure out which Jesus you're talking about, because the Jesus that we believe in and love and know lives today rose bodily from the grave. So we need to focus in on that, and people don't need to be overwhelmed by the multiple things where there are differences. They just need to know that there is no Trinity and Jesus did not rise bodily from the dead. That's a good place to start.
It is a great place to start. And any of the other minutiae that we introduce that may be very viable and of course good to know about, it pales in comparison to if you have the false Jesus, a false Jesus, one of the many counterfeit Jesuses being taught out there in the other religions. You can believe in that Jesus absolutely sincerely till you're blue in the face, but he can't save you. That's the bottom line.
That's right. Jesus is not Jehovah God. The Jesus of the Jehovah's Witnesses is not Jehovah God. That's very key. And, when you sit down to speak with them, that is something that has to be made clear right away, the difference between the two Jesuses.
Okay, I looked up gotquestions.org, which is a good resource, and they say the sect known today as Jehovah's Witnesses started out in Pennsylvania, 1870, as a Bible class led by Charles Russell. Russell named his group the Millennial Dawn Bible Study. Goes on to say a Watchtower Bible and Tract Society was founded in 1886, quickly became the vehicle through which the Millennial Dawn movement began distributing their views to others. The group was known as the Russellites until 1931, when due to a split in the organization, it was renamed Jehovah's Witnesses. Eric, in things you've written, including that e-newsletter, and folks, you can find that at ericbarger.com, you made some comparisons to the musician Prince and the Prince of Darkness. Explain.
Well, that came from The Prince of Darkness was a track I wrote many, many years ago, and I was on radio in Seattle at the time, 6 days a week, and I encouraged listeners to write and get the tracks, and then also to come to the Tacoma Dome in Tacoma, Washington. That was a sold-out concert, I think about 26,000 people, if I remember correctly, and to pass those out. And we only printed 5,000. We should have printed 25,000, but that's where that came from. The Prince was, the stuff he was doing, he was on the cutting edge of being provocative and sensual. The lyrics that I couldn't begin to even try to mask the meanings of them. One song in particular that, my gracious, couldn't even begin to hear on the air and won't. I saw this as something, being that I came from the rock music industry, and most of the listeners know I was a rock musician for many years. I was a record producer, recording engineer. I started playing in my first rock band when I was 11 and went on and did that professionally until I got saved. In fact, I was managing a recording studio when I became a Christian and when God delivered me from the drugs and all the stuff I was into and the New Age philosophies. And so I knew that industry inside and out, and Prince was one of the worst and appeared in a very big way in two of my books, especially one of them, my book From Rock to Rock, which has been out of print for some time. He took up at least a page and a half or 2 pages, and we were trying to cover many, many groups, but he was very important, and it became more important as time went along. So in comparing, I'm not really saying Prince was the devil, I'm just saying this is what he's doing, and it was a good play on words to say the Prince of Darkness, question mark.
Okay.
That was the name of it.
I headquarter, as does Jill Martin Rishi, who's in studio with me today, too. We headquarter out of the Twin Cities. This is where this man died, right in a suburb. And that day, all of downtown Minneapolis was lit up with purple. They were definitely doing an homage to this man who had some serious issues.
Yeah, and this goes back, we're talking about 2 to 3 decades ago that purple became his color. Mm-hmm. And we've seen it everywhere. I saw it on the airlines when I was traveling. I saw it in Southern California when I was there last week speaking. And this is, it's all over the place. So when I say that his mansion there is going to become another Graceland, his family may not allow that, or they may. I'm not sure. I'm just telling you that's the way people are viewing it. And it was pretty obvious the way people camped out outside. And, it's the nutty things that we do when we start idolizing men. And then we've got the whole problem secondarily of how many secularists out there, and sadly Christians, started calling him a Christian and mixing all together. And that's what we're talking about.
That's why we're talking about it, because based on the feedback I'm getting, and it's passionate. This man was a Christian. Jill, let's go back to Jehovah's Witness for just a minute. And we've had Mormonism in the news because it's been high profile. Mitt Romney, even Glenn Beck. Jehovah's Witness is not quite so high profile. How come?
Well, you don't hear as much about them because they don't have as many famous people.
Yeah.
Mitt Romney, Glenn Beck, they're more low profile, but when we do hear about them, it has to do with refusing blood transfusions, children dying, things like that. One very important thing that I know our listeners would be interested in is the fact that from 1897 to 1968, the Jehovah's Witnesses inaccurately prophesied that the Lord was going to return. And we have specific years. You can find it anywhere online. So we have at least a dozen false prophecies about the return of the Lord. That should raise a very big red flag to everyone and say, wait a minute, what does the Bible say about false prophecies?